Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Big Brother Canada 11 following week 5, and this is turning out to be a pretty interesting week, at least in terms of where the vote is going, where we saw the target shift a number of times, and now, even at this point, there's still some debate over where the vote could land, but we'll get into that in a moment. But there are 11 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 11, we have the latest boot from this season and the first member of the jury, but here we have Dan Zabo. And it's pretty crazy how despite Dan being only the third person of the season to be voted out, he somehow is part of the jury here, which is pretty funny there. And as I said before, I think Dan played a pretty terrible game. He was pretty much on the bottom the entire time. And even when he was HOH, he basically let Zach run it in his position where neither Zach nor Ty want to keep him around. And ultimately, he was taken out pretty unceremoniously here. I mean, he was literally voted out unanimously. And his main pitch on eviction night was the fact that if he went, then they would lose out on his good cooking, which obviously is a reason to keep someone. So really, Dan played a pretty mediocre game. Not too shocked to see him go here. And because of that, he is here number 11. And with that, there are 10 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win based on their current game position. And this one's a bit tough considering that we don't know for sure who's going to be going home this week, given that the vote seems to be pretty split for the time being, and it's been shifting a good amount, which is pretty unusual for Big Brother, but that's just the world that we're in right now. But at number 11, the person I believe is more likely to go home right now, and really the person that probably has lower win equity even if they survive this week, is Hope. Now, again, this is largely based off the latest digital daily drop, where it seems that the Shady Bunch is sort of leaning back towards keeping Jonathan in favor of Hope, even though they previously were a bit more open to keeping around Hope. And even now, it's still a possibility that things could shift, particularly with Santina, who seems to be in the middle for the time being. It's possible that the Shady Bunch could change their minds once again, and if they are able to do so, then they could very well get Santina on their side to ensure that they get their way here. So it's not a guarantee that Hope will be going home, but based on the evidence that we currently have, he does seem more likely to be voted out. He probably has more of an uphill battle towards staying, if I'm being honest. And honestly, even if he does stay, I just don't see him winning the game compared to Jonathan, which is a big reason I have him here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have the other person currently on the block, but here we have Jonathan, who was technically backdoor this week, and I believe is Ty's target, but it's a bit tough right now, as the house seems pretty split with the girly pots clearly in favor of keeping Jonathan around, and even the Shady Bunch has come around to being more open to keeping Jonathan around in the future. However, the biggest issue with Jonathan is simply the fact that he doesn't seem to want it that much. I mean, he's not really campaigning that hard to stay, and that could be a factor in why he gets voted out if that's the case. However, the main reason I have him above Hope is that, again, right now, based on the latest information we have, it does seem like Jonathan has more to work with compared to Hope if he chooses to fight to stay. And the other big reason is that I feel like if Jonathan stays, he definitely has more of a path forward where he probably will be in a stronger position in the future if he stays. Now, granted, I don't have the most faith in Jonathan as a player to where he'll take advantage of that position, but I feel like he'll be in a better position for sure than if Hope were to stay. And with the vote currently leaning towards Jonathan staying, I did decide to give him the edge here. But really the reason I have him this low is simply the uncertainty where I don't know where the vote's going to go by Thursday. It's very possible that it could shift to where Jonathan could end up going home here. But given everything that we have right now, as well as what would happen if either one of them were to stay, I just feel like Jonathan's more likely to be in a better position if he were to stay. And based on what we know right now, he seems more likely to stay. So because of that, I have him here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we actually have the current HOH, but here we have Ty. And wow, I mean, as I said last week, I felt like Ty was one of the more likely targets coming into this past week, where outside of Santina, he probably was the next most likely person to be targeted. And obviously, he does get saved here due to him winning HOH, but even then, he manages it poorly. I mean, what do you expect? Where first up, he wants to target Santina, which is a bad move on its own, as it basically just makes it so that he would have been the sole target left around, and Santina was someone also on the bottom and not likely to really shake things up. But even then, Santina wins safety from Canada, which forces in the shitless target again, where he ends up putting Hope and Renee in the block with Renee as his target. But even then, he picks Shenaya to play in the veto, probably the only person in the house other than Renee who would use the veto on Renee. And guess what? Shenaya wins the veto, which causes him to shit his target again. And eventually he does put Jonathan up, basically pitting Hope and Jonathan against each other to guarantee that someone from the crown will be voted out. However, even then, he has come off pretty poorly, as you would expect. And at this point, he is pretty much the consensus target coming in next week, where pretty much everyone left in the game plans to target him next week. And considering that he can't play since he's the current HOH, he's pretty much screwed unless he wins the veto, which, to be fair, is a possibility. However, it's still a pretty bad position for him to be in. He has largely squandered this HOH and did himself no favors this past week. So it's for all those reasons that he's here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we actually have someone who was a target coming to this week, but here we have Renee. And as I said, Renee has largely fallen off from last week, where despite her seeming to be in a good position at one point, she was pretty much put at the bottom towards the end of last week. And that really continued into this week, where she was Ty's target after Santina won safety. And while she got her best case scenario in Shenaya winning the veto, I feel like Renee didn't really do that much to really get that outcome. It's just something that happened. And even then, there was actually a chance that Shenaya wouldn't use the veto. She did consider not using it as a way of alienating the house. And yes, while she does do it, it also shows that Renee is not that well positioned in the game. Now, granted, the one pro you can give her is the fact that the girly pops have kind of re-solidified to a degree, and they're now sort of this alliance that she's a part of. But even then, I feel like she is probably the worst position within that group and is probably the most likely to be targeted in the coming weeks. So it's for all those reasons that I can't really have her any higher. She's really still at the bottom, and while she was technically saved this past week, I feel like I can't really credit her too much for that. So it's because of that I do have her here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have a player that's kind of similar to Renee, but here we have Claudia. And this was a pretty weird week for Claudia, where on one hand, the girly pops did re-solidify, which is pretty good for Claudia's game, and there is this potential path for her forward. However, there is still some pretty big knocks. I still think she largely attached herself too closely with Ty, and while she is distancing herself from Ty to where she is open to targeting him at this point, I also feel like it just doesn't help her perception that she stuck with him this long, and really, targeting Ty at this point isn't even that good for their game, as it really opens her up to be targeted in the future, so that's not good there. Not to mention the fact that there was actually a chance that she could have been the backdoor target this week, despite Ty being the HOH, where he threatened to put her up sort of as a way of getting leverage over people, which is pretty bad there. Really goes to show how he doesn't really respect her. And I just find it hard to put Claudia too much higher than here, where I feel like she technically is less likely to be targeted than Renee at this point, but I also feel like this was not the best week in the world for her. So because of that, she is here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and I'm actually a bit surprised by how high this person was, especially if you had told me last week that this person would be here. And I'm sure some people feel that this person is too high, but given the rest of the field, I feel like this person does have a path forward. But here we have Santina, and it's sort of crazy the ride that she went on this past week, where coming into the week, she was pretty much the target by most of the house, where it was pretty much either going to be her or Ty. She gets probably her worst case scenario of Ty winning HOH, who was pretty intent on targeting her. But then she gets saved by Canada, which is a knock in the sense that that's something that was out of her control, but is more so driven by the edit that she's been getting on the show. However, now that she's gotten safety, I feel like there is a path for her forward, where I feel like at this point more people are looking at targeting Ty than targeting her. She's also the swing vote coming to this round, which is pretty unexpected, where she's in the middle of the girly pops and the shady bunch over whether to keep Jonathan or Hope. So I feel like there's a path for her there. I feel like regardless of whether Hope or Jonathan get out, that she will probably become the 5th person of the crown, which granted she would be the 5th in that group, but it's still a better position than she was in before. And again, I feel like with the target shifting to other people, I feel like there is a path for her forward. Plus she can win competitions. I think there is something there for Santina, and I feel like if she gets to the end, I could see her winning a jury vote due to her being an underdog. Now, at the end of the day, still find it very hard to see how she gets to the end without being targeted. And plus, if like a Dan or Anika win HOH, then I could see them targeting her sort of as a way of keeping the peace. But I feel like compared to where I felt about her last week, I feel like Santina is in a much better position at this point, even if it is a bit shaky. So it's for all those reasons I did decide to bump her up, though realistically I feel like the top four are more solidified. So because of that, she is here number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and we're going for someone that has largely shot up in the last week to someone who has largely gone down in the past week. But here we have Koozie. And obviously, Koozie was someone I had at number 1 last week, despite me worrying about her long term prospects and her just being this big threat. However, it does seem in the past week that this threat has been accelerated to where clearly like her relationship with the girly pops has deteriorated, and really the whole girly pops coming back together is probably a detriment to her game. Not to mention the fact that Daniel and Anika like recognize the need to target her as well, and Daniel's even gone so far as to present himself to the other women as Koozie and Anika being this final two, where Koozie's the bigger threat there, in order to further increase the target on Koozie's back, when in reality, Daniel and Anika are the ones at the final two, but the result of that is that Koozie is now a bigger target, and there is a chance that she could come up on the block this next week if certain HOH results go a certain way. And in general, I feel like Koozie is in a much worse position now than she was last week, to where I find it very hard to see how she's able to get to the end. Now, granted, I still think there's a chance she could recover. However, I feel like at this point, it's just getting more and more likely that she'll be targeted soon, which is a big reason I have her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we actually have the highest ranked girly pop, but here we have Shenaya. And Shenaya won the veto this week, which is pretty good there. Plus she used it on Renee, which pretty much ensures that both Renee and Claudia stay in the game. And in turn, like her re-solidifying the girly pops is pretty good. And plus, she is the least targeted within the girly pots, where Renee is going to be targeted first over her being on the bottom. Claudia is more likely to be targeted than her, given her connection with Ty. And obviously, coming to this vote, the girly pops constitute a decent chunk of the vote here, where they could potentially get their way in keeping Jonathan, which would be pretty good there. Now, there is some concern about Shenaya's connections outside the girly pots, where her closest connection there is Daniel, which, I mean, say what you will about that. But I feel like of the girly pops, I feel like Shenaya is playing the best right now. I feel like she's the best position within those three. And plus, I could see a path for her forward in the game. But I feel like the top two are pretty clear at this point, which is a big reason I have her here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and it's pretty clear the top two are they are both members of the Shady Bunch, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But number 2, I did decide to go with Anika. And the main reason I did is I feel like Anika is someone who probably has a better shot of winning a jury vote compared to Daniel. People seem to be respecting her as a player. And as I've said in these power rankings, I think Anika has been learning the game as she has been going along. However, I feel like right now Daniel is technically in a better position than Anika, and plus I feel like he is technically outplaying her as well, where he has pretty much created this perception that Anika and Koozie are the ones running the Shady Bunch, while he's the one on the outs, despite them having a final two with each other. So I feel like to that end, Daniel has been doing more to outplay Anika, which is pretty not great there. However, I still feel like Anika is in one of the better positions within the house. I feel like she is someone that is in the majority and will probably stay in the majority for the foreseeable future. And plus, there is a chance that she could get her way this week. And where despite the Shady Bunch initially wanting to vote out Jonathan, it's Anika's relationship with Jonathan that has pushed them to want to potentially keep Jonathan. And I feel like if that's the case, then that'll be some good gameplay there, something that you can point to, and obviously keeping around someone that's very close to her. So I still feel like Anika's in a very solid position, and I feel pretty confident in her chances moving forward. But I still feel like the number 1 person is better positioned than her, which is a big reason that she is here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person who I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother Canada 11 right now is still Daniel. And again, I feel like Daniel's probably the best positioned person in the house, where he is like pretty much in with a lot of people, both in the Shady Bunch, who are in a pretty solid position there, as well as a lot of the girly pops, to where he is very unlikely to be targeted in the future. And as I said a moment ago, I find it impressive that he's able to increase the target on Koozie's back by making it seem like Koozie and Anika have this final two, when in reality it's him and Anika that have the final two. So I find that pretty impressive. And plus, there's a chance that he get his way here, depending on how the vote shakes out there. And I feel like he's probably safer in the game compared to Anika as well. Now, where there is some issue is his jury prospects, where I feel like Anika right now probably beats him in a jury vote, if I'm being honest. I feel like not as many people respect Daniel's game, and I feel like based on their attitudes that they could potentially feel burned by Daniel by the end of it. But there's still plenty of game left to be played, and I'm curious to see how Daniel will proceed in the future, where I feel like he could probably rectify that jury management issue, depending on how he handles people on their way out. And it's for that reason that I did decide to give Daniel the benefit of the doubt. However, I feel like if we start to see his jury management really start to weigh him down as we see more people enter the jury house, then I could see him being bumped down. But for now, I did decide to leave him here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps out the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so stay tuned for that. I'm currently covering Survivor 44 and doing weekly power rankings of that as well, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.